When Andrew Parker Bowles stepped into Buckingham Palace for a secret midnight meeting with King Charles, no one expected it would lead to the Queen's downfall. But what he carried wasn't just a message, it was a confession decades in the making. A confession that questioned the foundation of Charles and Camilla's entire marriage. The palace would never be the same again. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The corridors of Buckingham Palace had witnessed their fair share of secrets, but few came cloaked in shadows as chilling as this one. The former husband of Queen Camilla, once dismissed as a relic of the past, had returned with intent. Andrew Parker Bowles didn't come to reminisce or plead. He came to unravel a truth that had been suppressed under decades of royal ceremony. Reaching through discreet channels only known to the monarchy's oldest circles, Andrew secured a silent audience with the king. No announcements, no guards, no traces. The request arrived not through official lines but in a hand-sealed note delivered by an unseen intermediary. Charles, seated beneath the heavy portraits of his ancestors, hesitated for hours, torn between curiosity and dread. Memories of old betrayals and the painful triangle between himself, Camilla, and Andrew resurfaced like ghosts in the dimly lit study. But something in that note stirred unease, a whisper from the past too loud to ignore. He agreed. Under cover of darkness, deep within the palace's underbelly, the two men met. There were no aides, no security. Only silence, the low hum of the building's ancient bones, and the tension that bound their shared history. Charles, dressed plainly, tried to maintain a regal calm, but his heartbeat betrayed him. Andrew sat across, face lined with age but hardened with purpose. He didn't bow. He didn't blink. With a voice low and sharp, he began, "Your Majesty, I'm not here for pleasantries. I'm here to warn you about the woman who sleeps beside you every night." Charles didn't speak. His face tightened. The air thinned. Andrew leaned in and began to unfold the tale. Years ago, during a period of estrangement from Camilla, the two had formed an unlikely alliance, not for reconciliation, but for strategy. Together, they had crafted a plan. A plan that involved analyzing Charles's emotional vulnerabilities, studying his habits, routines, and psychological states. Camilla had sought more than love. She sought power. And Andrew, perhaps bitter or perhaps complicit, had helped her gather every piece. Charles, stunned, listened as Andrew described how Camilla had used intimate knowledge of his grief, especially after Diana's death, to edge her way into a role no one thought she'd ever legally secure. "It was calculated," Andrew said, eyes gleaming with regret or vindication, or maybe both. "She knew your pain, and she used it." When Charles finally found his voice, it cracked through the weight of silence. "What are you saying?" he whispered, barely able to meet Andrew's gaze. But Andrew didn't offer comfort or clarity, only finality. "I have proof," he said, reaching into a leather folder but pulling nothing out yet. "But I won't give it to you now. You need to find it for yourself, before it's too late." Then he stood, turned, and walked away, his footsteps fading into the palace's sleeping halls. But as Andrew exited into the palace shadows, it wasn't just Charles who was left shaken. Camilla had already sensed the disturbance. The Queen had always smiled through crisis, but this time, she didn't need a press briefing to know something had gone terribly wrong. One encrypted message confirmed it all. Andrew had met the king, alone, without protocol. And suddenly, the woman who had climbed to power through elegance and calculation began to feel the walls tighten. The buzz came not through the usual chatter or whispers in royal corridors, but from a private, secure device that only a few in the monarchy even knew existed. A single line lit up the screen. "Andrew Parker entered the palace last night. No schedule. Met the king. Basement." For a moment, Camilla sat perfectly still at her dressing table. The ivory comb in her hand hovered mid-air, her reflection staring back with poised calm. But inside her chest, panic bloomed like wildfire. She set the comb down with a sharp, deliberate click. The message didn't require interpretation. This wasn't a visit. It was an ambush, one that she had never seen coming. And Andrew, Her former partner in manipulation, the man who once toasted her rise to power by candlelight, was now moving against her in silence. Her lips curved into a controlled smile, but her mind began spinning through every locked drawer of secrets that could have been exposed. Within minutes, Camilla gave a direct order. No guards, no press, no royal convoy. "Prepare the car," she instructed coldly. "Wiltshire, now." She drove herself along winding country roads that once held fond memories of strategy and stolen nights. But today, every mile pounded with betrayal. Autumn leaves streaked the windshield. Wind howled along the hillsides, but Camilla remained focused, her grip on the wheel white-knuckled. The moment she reached Andrew's secluded estate, there were no greetings, no pleasantries. She stepped inside like a storm about to break, and found him there, Andrew Parker Bowles, seated by the fire as if he had been expecting her all along. His expression was calm, his tone casual, but the air between them crackled with unspoken history. "You met Charles," she said, each syllable like ice. Andrew took a sip of whiskey before replying, "Did you think I'd stay quiet forever?" The tension ignited. Their voices rose. Camilla accused him of revenge. He called her a traitor to her own promises. She reminded him of the deal. When she wore the crown, he would wield silent power. He reminded her of how she'd shut every door on him once the crown sat on her head. "You discarded me, Camilla," he said, tossing a thick envelope onto the table. "Now I return the favor." Inside were documents that could bring her world crashing down. Charles's personal psychological profiles, gathered in secret during his most fragile years. Camilla's old notes. Email correspondences. Strategized manipulation laid bare. Camilla didn't flinch, but her fingers trembled as she reached for the envelope. She knew what she'd see. She knew what she'd done. But she wouldn't let him win. Camilla left Wiltshire with her hands trembling but her mind plotting. If Andrew wanted war, she'd bring one. While Camilla rushed to spin a narrative of control, King Charles had already acted. Without alerting the palace or even his closest advisors, he reached into the shadows of his past, activating a covert unit of loyal allies, men who knew how to uncover secrets without leaving fingerprints. It had been years since Charles had called upon these men, old comrades from a life far removed from palace decorum, men who knew him not as a king, but as a fellow soldier, a confidant, a brother in arms. The moment Andrew Parker walked away from that secret midnight meeting, Charles wasted no time. He knew that whatever had been revealed was just the beginning. The polished surface of Camilla's charm had always masked something more calculating, but now that suspicion had teeth. He placed encrypted calls to 3 individuals, each one handpicked not for their rank, but for their unwavering loyalty and skill in discretion. A retired colonel who once led covert operations, a former intelligence officer fluent in the language of buried secrets, and a legal expert who had protected royal assets through wars of inheritance and scandal. Together, they formed a triad of truth, answerable only to Charles himself. Their mission was clear: dig deep into the years when Camilla and Andrew were separated. Uncover everything: letters, emails, personnel logs, conversations, anything that could connect the dots between private manipulation and public betrayal. They were told to operate far from the eyes of the royal staff and without leaving a trace in palace records. Within 48 hours, the first breakthrough came from a name long buried in the past: Camilla's former private secretary, a woman who had disappeared from public life after 1995. Located in a quiet countryside cottage in the Cotswolds, she agreed to speak only after assurances of full anonymity and protection. Her confession stunned the team. "I was instructed to secretly duplicate Prince Charles's psychological files, his counseling sessions, notes from royal therapists, even his sleep patterns. Camilla told me it was to help her understand him better. But I knew it was more. It was strategy." From there, the evidence snowballed. The former housekeeper of the Bowles estate, now retired in Yorkshire, provided testimony over a quiet lunch in a rural pub. With shaking hands and haunted eyes, he recalled Andrew arriving in the dead of night, retrieving documents from Camilla. He said it was for writing his memoirs, the man whispered. But I saw one of the folders once. It was thick with medical files, all about the prince's breakdown after Diana's passing. I shouldn't have seen it, but I did. And then came the digital trail. A recovery expert retrieved fragments of old emails from an abandoned server, one in particular freezing the room. Use his emotional triggers. Loss, regret, the shadow of Diana. They're keys to the gates of power. It was signed simply, C. But the deeper Charles dug, the more sinister the truth became and the more unbearable the betrayal felt. The walls of Highgrove, once a sanctuary for Charles's grief after Diana's death, now whispered with treachery. Every moment he had thought was love, every whisper, every comforting embrace was starting to look like a lie wrapped in velvet. It began with a folder, retrieved from a dusty archive Camilla never expected to surface. In it, investigators discovered not just psychological reports, but signatures proof that Camilla had personally requested access to Charles's therapy records during their years apart. His private sessions, emotional assessments, trauma notes following Diana's death, everything had been meticulously reviewed. Charles read each page as if reliving the pain all over again, but this time from the outside, as a man watching his own soul dissected for strategy. Every touch he had believed was compassion. Every word whispered to soothe his sleepless nights. It all now reeked of rehearsed manipulation. The quiet nights at Highgrove when Camilla would softly murmur, "I understand what you've lost," felt less like comfort and more like tactical rehearsals, designed to hook a broken man. Then came the email. Recovered by the digital forensics expert, dated 1996, Camilla to Andrew. A single line stood out like a wound reopened. Use motherly warmth, evoke Diana's shadow. He'll reach for the comfort we create. Charles froze. His hand trembled as he held the printed message. Motherly warmth, evoke Diana's shadow. The language wasn't loving, it was surgical. This wasn't affection. It was weaponized empathy. The testimonies that followed only deepened the wound. A former nurse, once working within the Royal Psychological Unit, agreed to speak off-record. Her voice shook as she recalled Camilla's frequent visits, not as a lover, but as someone oddly insistent on understanding Charles's emotional breakdowns. She asked for phrases, the nurse whispered, things that triggered reassurance, vulnerability. I thought it was for support. Now I know it was something else. Charles spiraled into a personal reckoning. He sat, alone for hours, lost in thought, replaying memories with a sharper lens, her knowing glances, the way she always seemed to anticipate his fears, the phrases she used too perfect, too precise, as if pulled from his own sessions. It crushed him. What he had taken for intimacy had been strategy. What he thought was healing had been control. His breakdown was not loud. It was quiet, internal, and devastating. Rage boiled beneath the surface. Grief clung to every breath. But through it all, something else emerged. Resolve. The blindfold had been torn off, the veil lifted. The woman he believed stood beside him in love had all along been one step ahead, building her empire on the ruins of his sorrow. While Charles mourned the love he thought he had, Camilla launched a ruthless PR offensive to burn Andrew's credibility to the ground. Camilla knew how to weaponize the media, and this time, she made it personal. Within 48 hours, Andrew Parker was trending not for his truth, but for his supposed madness. Old photos, whisper campaigns, manipulated psychiatrists, Camilla was out to erase him. She didn't hesitate. As Charles mourned the emotional manipulation he had just uncovered, Camilla was already drafting her next move behind tightly sealed doors. Elena, her most trusted advisor, the same woman who had orchestrated countless press stunts, image repairs, and behind-the-scenes influence operations, was summoned immediately. Camilla's instructions were chillingly clear. Destroy Andrew's credibility. Bury him under a landslide of scandal, humiliation, and doubt so massive that even those inclined to believe him would think twice before daring to say it aloud. And Elena delivered. Within hours, anonymous tips began flooding the inboxes of tabloid editors and royal correspondents. Stories about Andrew's supposed mental breakdown after the divorce, claims of erratic behavior, violent outbursts, obsession with palace politics. Headlines painted him as a bitter, delusional ex-husband chasing shadows for relevance. The real punch came when a psychiatrist, one who had briefly seen Andrew during his post-divorce spiral, was paid handsomely to appear on national television. Sitting behind polished glasses and clinical jargon, he spoke with deliberate weight. Mr. Parker exhibits classic traits of paranoia, delusions of betrayal, compulsive patterns linked to unresolved abandonment trauma. It was the kind of diagnosis designed to stick, no matter how speculative. The damage was immediate and brutal. Social media erupted. Memes ridiculing Andrew's claims spread like wildfire, images of him juxtaposed with crowns, tinfoil hats, and mocking captions about power-hungry has-beens. His character was ripped apart by strangers, former friends, even extended family who chose silence over association. One by one, Andrew's allies began to retreat. Calls went unanswered. Journalists who had once shown interest in his story now labeled it as unhinged conspiracy. Invitations dried up. Former military colleagues distanced themselves. His name became toxic, and within days, he was cast to the margins of public sympathy. Camilla, watching it all unfold, allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. From her private quarters, she scrolled through headlines, saw the trending hashtags, read the mocking threads, and smiled. In the court of public opinion, Andrew was no longer a man with a warning. He was a joke, a warning ignored. But even in that moment of victory, something was off. Camilla noticed it during a dinner at Clarence's house. Charles, seated across from her, was distant, cold, withdrawn. He offered no warmth, no words beyond the mechanical. His eyes didn't meet hers the way they used to. And that silence, that eerie, penetrating silence, cut deeper than any article ever could. She thought she'd crushed Andrew, but Charles's silence wasn't submission. It was the stillness before a reckoning. In the dead of night, beneath the gilded floors of Buckingham, Charles opened a box that had been sealed since Diana's funeral. Inside were words that confirmed every nightmare, every suspicion, every betrayal. Camilla hadn't loved him. She had used him like a pawn. The palace was asleep, but Charles's thoughts raced louder than any midnight wind. The smear campaign against Andrew had turned the public tide, but it did nothing to settle the storm in his heart. He couldn't ignore the hollow sound of Camilla's apologies, the calculated timing of her tears, or the uncanny way her words always seemed to echo the darkest corners of his private fears. He needed more than second-hand accounts and shredded emails. He needed truth carved in stone. And he knew exactly where it might be hidden. Taking the old brass key gifted to him by Queen Elizabeth, one that unlocked the deepest layers of the palace, Charles slipped out, unguarded, his footsteps a whisper through corridors lined with centuries of legacy. His destination, the Royal Archive, a fortress of forgotten truths. In the basement vault, amid the damp, cold air and rows of dust-laden boxes, he found it. A steel-reinforced case, its surface marked with one name, Parker B.S., Camilla, Psychological Records Access. His fingers trembled as he turned the key. Inside were documents that hadn't seen daylight in decades. Records from royal therapists, behavioral analysis logs, evaluations of his mental state following Diana's death, all requested. All signed off under the guise of emotional support, and all directed to one woman, Mrs. Camilla Parker Bowles. He flipped through them with a growing sense of dread. Page after page laid bare his emotional architecture, the weaknesses he thought were his own to bear, now weaponized by the very person he trusted most. One file contained notes on grief triggers, another on patterns of isolation. But the final document stopped his breath cold. A page scrawled in Camilla's unmistakable handwriting, dated shortly after Diana's funeral. Phase 3 complete. Proceed to secure position. Charles' now fully open emotional trust gained. He dropped the file. His knees buckled beneath the weight of the revelation. He had believed he was choosing love in the ruins of heartbreak. But all along, he had been led, guided, manipulated by a woman who knew precisely where to touch and how to twist. He didn't scream, he didn't shout. He simply wept alone, silent, his tears soaking the cold archive floor. Every moment of intimacy, every look of understanding, every promise of loyalty had been constructed like a chessboard, and he had been the most important piece moved by her hand. Once the sobs quieted, he reached into his coat and pulled out a secure device. With trembling hands, he photographed every page, every signature, every damning line, and sent them to his private team with one instruction: verify immediately. Within minutes, confirmation arrived. The handwriting was real, the records authentic, the betrayal absolute. There was no going back. What Camilla had done crossed every line, and Charles prepared for the confrontation that would break the monarchy. Camilla entered the chamber in her finest black silk, thinking it was just another meeting. But when she saw Charles's face ashen, eyes filled with tears and fury, she knew something had shifted. The Queen had just walked into her own trial. The air inside the hidden room on the palace's second floor was heavy, tense, suffocating. Charles had chosen this setting deliberately, far from the press, the staff, and the ever-watching public eye. This was not a spectacle. It was an execution cloaked in silence. Seated around the long oak table were 5 figures. 2 of them men who once served with Charles in his military days, wore expressions that betrayed nothing but quiet authority. Beside them, the royal lawyer sat with a thick folder sealed in red wax. 2 witnesses waited across the room, their identities still shielded. This wasn't a security briefing. It was a reckoning years in the making. Camilla had been summoned under the pretense of a strategic meeting on palace security, but the moment she stepped into the room, something felt wrong. Charles didn't rise to greet her. He didn't even speak. Instead, he gestured to the empty chair at the center. She sat cautiously, confusion masked by a practiced smile. "What is this?" she asked, scanning the unfamiliar faces. Charles's voice, when it finally came, was low and deliberate. "It's time we deal in truth, Camilla. All of it." With a nod, the lawyer opened the folder and began laying out the case. Copies of emails dated, authenticated, and damning. Pages of Charles's psychological records marked with Camilla's initials. Handwritten annotations. Phrases that mirrored the exact lines she'd used to gain Charles's trust. The former private secretary was called forward first. Her voice trembled, but her words were sharp. "She told me to gather everything from His Majesty's therapy logs. Said it was for support. But I saw what she did with them. She memorized them. She rehearsed responses. She crafted every interaction." Next came the housekeeper, once dismissed as irrelevant. His account sent a chill through the room. Andrew came at night, took the files, said it was part of a long-term plan. She didn't stop him. She instructed him. Then the final blow, the nurse who confirmed Camilla had sat with her, asking intimate questions about Charles's breakdowns after Diana's death, prying into his mind like a surgeon preparing for an operation. Camilla's composure began to crack. Her eyes welled, voice shaking as she cried out, "You don't understand, I loved him. I needed to know how to protect him." But the room remained still. Her pleas turned to protests, then denials, then finally, the faintest whisper of truth. "Yes, I asked for the files. Yes, I wanted control. But it wasn't just about power, it was survival. You don't survive in this family without knowing how to win." But Charles's resolve was unshakable. There would be no mercy, no forgiveness, only the final stripping of a queen. Stripped of her title, her power, and her palace walls, Camilla stood alone in the rain-soaked fields of Ray Mill. The monarchy she thought she conquered had cast her out. Her final act of betrayal now sealed her fate in disgrace. The decision came swiftly. The royal tribunal had ended, but Charles did not wait for whispers to circulate or for newspapers to catch scent. In a locked, soundproof chamber inside Buckingham, he signed the royal decree with a shaking but resolute hand. It was not just the revocation of ceremonial titles, It was a complete erasure of public presence. Camilla would retain no authority, no platform, no visibility. Her name would no longer accompany his in official proceedings. Her face would not grace the balcony again. The crown had not just rejected her, it had erased her. That same evening, with no press notified and no public statement issued, 2 royal guards entered her private suite. There was no confrontation, no audience, only quiet instructions and a sealed order. Camilla, pale and furious, demanded to speak to Charles. But the answer was delivered through silence. She was to be escorted out. The drive to Ray Mill was conducted under cover of darkness. The estate that had once been her private sanctuary now felt like a prison. She screamed betrayal from the back seat, swearing vengeance, calling the king a coward. But no one responded. Not the guards, not the driver. Her voice, once capable of commanding headlines and steering the palace's will, now echoed into indifference. As the gates of Ray Mill opened, she stepped out alone, rain drenching her hair, fury trembling in her clenched fists. But there was no one to witness her fall, no reporters, no sympathizers, not even a single aide. The monarchy had erased her like a stain too dangerous to explain. Back at Clarence House, Charles stood at his window, staring into the mist that swallowed London's skyline. His mind wandered to Diana's voice, a memory so sharp it could cut through the years. "She was never meant to wear that crown, Charles," she had once whispered, in a moment of heartbreak. "It doesn't belong to her soul." He hadn't understood it then, but now, as the weight of truth settled in his chest, he realized Diana had seen what he had refused to acknowledge. Camilla hadn't just infiltrated the crown, she'd weaponized it. And though no official statement had been released, the public began to notice the void. Camilla's name disappeared from court circulars. Her photo faded from engagements. Speculation ignited online. Theories whispered in aristocratic circles. Something had happened. Something seismic. But no one dared say it aloud, not yet. Only a hush settled over Britain, a knowing pause before the storm. But just as the royal household began to settle, another shockwave was coming. Charles was about to reveal the final piece of truth. In a rare, solemn address from Buckingham Palace, King Charles did what no monarch before him dared to do, confess his own weakness. But in that confession, he shattered the illusion that once held his kingdom together. The palace was still. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was almost heavier than the chaos. And yet, in the quiet, Charles knew that the cost of truth had not yet been fully paid. For years, he had been a man buried under grief, regret, and desperate need. A man who had chosen comfort over confrontation, loyalty over legacy. Now, with the crown still on his head but the foundation beneath it shaken to its core, he did the unthinkable. He summoned his most trusted biographer, not to craft a legacy, but to record a confession. Not for history, but for justice. Behind closed doors, without handlers, without scripts, Charles laid bare his soul. He spoke of the emptiness that had consumed him after Diana's death, of the guilt that never truly left. And in that void, he admitted, he had clung to Camilla like a drowning man reaching for driftwood. "I didn't see manipulation," he said softly. "I saw comfort. I mistook calculation for care." His voice cracked when he acknowledged how Camilla had used Diana's memory not to honor it, but to weaponize it. He revealed how he had once envisioned Camilla as the moral compass of his reign, the quiet force of resilience and wisdom to guide the new monarchy. "I thought she could be the anchor," he confessed, "but I didn't realize she was the storm." For the first time, he admitted the full weight of his guilt. Not just for what had happened with Camilla, but for what had been lost with Diana. He had buried her too quickly, not just in ritual, but in relevance. He had allowed her voice, her warnings, her legacy to be diminished, and in doing so, he had opened the gates for a betrayal that was hiding in plain sight. "She warned me," he whispered, "and I silenced the warning because I wanted peace. But peace built on lies always ends in fire." He declared then that the institution he inherited would never again be left unguarded from within. He pledged to create a new system, one that shielded the monarchy not just from scandal, but from manipulation. A council of oversight, stripped of personal bias, fortified by transparency. No more unchecked influence behind palace walls, no more shadows. But it was his final words that pierced deepest. Turning to the window, eyes fixed on the sky as if searching for the only woman who had ever seen through the illusion, Charles said, "Diana was the only one who saw clearly, the only one who loved without agenda. I failed her in life. I won't fail her legacy." As the crown adjusted to the silence left by Camilla's fall, the monarchy faced an uncertain dawn, where truth, at last, had found its voice. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.